with regard to the sanctions, could you just clarify on the PLO and PA? Could you just clarify that this is not in retaliation for or related to or an effort to hinder the PA's cooperation with France, Britain, Canada, and the Gulf states who have said that they intend to recognize Palestinian statehood in September? And the second one, when should we expect the biannual compliance report on Israel's compliance? I assume that's the same time schedule as the Palestinian assessment?
Well, I'll say on this one, and I'll refer to my earlier answer in terms of the fact that this is biannual review. This has been, therefore, in process. The review period ended in January 2025. Yes. Yes.
Sorry, but you didn't answer the first one. Or say, so does that mean the Israel one is complete, and the U.S. found no violations?
Are you concerned about the degree of global diplomatic isolation for the U.S. on its entire position relating to the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I reject that premise that we are isolated. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the State Department reported to Congress that the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and Palestinian Authority, PA, are not in compliance with their commitments under the PLO Commitments Compliance Act of 1989 and the Middle East Peace Commitments Act of 2002. In response, the United States is imposing sanctions that deny visas to PLO members and PA officials in accordance with Section 604A1 of the Middle East Peace Commitments Act. These actions reflect our national security interests and our commitment to holding the PLO and PA accountable for undermining the prospects for peace.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to come back to what you announced. I mean, there was a statement this morning, but you repeated it, to the sanctions against members of the Palestinian Authority and the PLO. Could you specify to us who exactly are sanctioned, the officials that are sanctioned, and at what level? And could you explain to us a little bit the context of this coming really 2 days or a couple of days after the UN conference at the UN on the Palestinian statehood, and the push of many allies, US allies, France, UK, Canada, for Palestinian state?
Well, look, to stress, this is a biannual review that happens twice a year in every single year. And this report refers to the review period that ended in January 2025. So in terms of the timing of this report, this is a biannual report provided to Congress, and that's being provided here. It is the first report being provided under this administration. So in terms of timing, that's the timing, and that's why we're seeing this report now. In terms of specific individuals, outlined in the media note in terms of the policy, one of the many policy options that were available that is being implemented. I don't want to get into specific cases because ultimately, per the report, there is an opportunity for a case-by-case basis consideration for a waiver. And so we saw the media note outlining certain policy implications, the actions that were taken, but ultimately this is a case-by-case, or there is that option for in terms of a visa. Yes? Thank you, Tommy. I'll take 2 more questions on this specific topic, on the PLO announcement, and then we can go on to a broader region for sure, but 2 more on this specific topic.
But just to follow up with that, you, for example, for Brazil, for the Supreme Court judge, you didn't have any problems naming him and saying who it was. But in this case, you're not naming anybody, and could you give us a sense of as to what level they are? How many people are we talking about?
Well, so the sanctions will impose denial of visas for PLO members and PA officials. And again, to stress, a waiver may be considered on a case-by-case basis consistent with our national security interests. Yes?
Thank you, Tommy. Appreciate it. You said you were going to take a few more questions on this.
I'll take 2 more on this specific topic.
Yeah.
Broader region for sure, but on this specific one.
So on that one, specifically, the previous administration engaged with Palestinian Authority to find a solution for the future governance of Gaza. And that administration and Trump administration also said Hamas has no place in Gaza's future, a position that is widely shared by many other countries in the world. How does this action specifically impact Trump administration's ability to engage with PA? Maybe it doesn't impact it at all. Can you help us understand that? And were there any heads up given to Arab states about this action? Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what it will look like going forward, but what I can say is that the Biden administration in this biannual review also found them in noncompliance. They chose not to take certain actions. This is the first report of this biannual review that is under this current administration. and we decided to take one of a few actions that were available in terms of once we identified the noncompliance. That is what this indicates. There's nothing further to read beyond this report except for the report finding noncompliance, as well as saying we are taking that action in terms of certain restrictions. But I'm not going to speculate further beyond that.
And the Arab states?
I'm not going to preview private diplomatic discussions. Yes. Sorry, one more behind, and then we'll move on to a topic.
Thank you, Tommy. Two things. Of course, I mean, some actions were taken against the PLO back in 2017. They shut off the office, they cut off all aid, and so on. So this is also during the first Trump administration. I wanted to ask you that the Israeli media is reporting that Israel is going to annex part of Gaza and that they have a green light from the United States of America. That's what the government claims, the Israeli government. And that is at a time when the envoy, Steve Witkoff, is meeting with the Israeli government, meeting with Netanyahu, what has been described as a very decisive meeting. Do you have anything to elaborate on this? Can you share with us what is he discussing? Is it going to be, are parts of Gaza going to be annexed?
Well, what I can say is what my colleague Caroline just spoke to. She spoke with the special envoy this morning. She outlined just a few minutes ago what the point of the meetings were, addressing the humanitarian issue, the situation that we are seeing, addressing next steps for Gaza. I have nothing further to add for her comments, but it is a clear indication that this administration is determined to getting as much aid as possible into Gaza without it being looted by Hamas.
But does this administration look favorably at annexing parts of Gaza?
Well, what we're focused on now is trying to address this conflict. We're trying to end this conflict. We are trying to get as much food into Gaza as possible. I'm not going to speculate or preview where these discussions may go. What I can say is what we've been focused on doing, what Caroline described just a few minutes ago, what we've been talking about here from this podium for many, many months. Ending this conflict, getting as much food into Gaza as possible where it is not being looted by Hamas.
Okay.
Yes.
Two questions, and thank you, Tommy. I appreciate it. Kelly Meyer with News Nation. One on Gaza and one on Ukraine, if I may. So with Gaza, I wanted to ask what's the expected outcome from this visit from Special Envoy Steve Witkoff as well as Ambassador Huckabee? Is this to push both sides to break through this jam and get through these negotiations? And will this potentially upset Israel, who has said that there is no real starvation happening in Gaza?
Well, what my colleague Caroline said, and to reiterate here, it shows that President Trump has a humanitarian heart, that he wants to get as much food into Gaza as possible without it being looted by Hamas. The president also truthed earlier today, saying the fastest way to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. They have refused to do so. We've also seen the secretary speak earlier today about how there was a ceasefire in principle with an agreement, and then Hamas came and rejected the deal. That is the lack of good faith we are seeing from Hamas when it comes to these conversations. So ultimately, what this shows is that President Trump wants to get as much aid into Gaza without it being looted by Hamas as possible. That is a commitment we've had, and that's what this is showing.
And just on Ukraine quickly, there's the talk about getting, European allies to pay into this fund in the Treasury Department, and then we would then send the weapons on to Ukraine. Do you have a sense of just how exactly you're going to make sure that these European allies do pay into this fund, and do you have a sense of how many so far have agreed to this?
Well, I'm not going to comment on pending congressional action or refer you to Congress on that, but what I can say is talk about the NATO weapons deal that was talked about by the president. The fact that we have an agreement with NATO in order for them to buy weapons in which they can then send to other countries if they so choose. And I think this is part of an America First foreign policy and the burden sharing that we've seen pushed by President Trump and Secretary Rubio. The idea that we have other countries stepping up that makes stronger alliances, that makes partnerships stronger, while at the same time helping the American people, revitalizing certain industries, increasing the amount of purchases that we're seeing. So we're seeing that impetus from this administration. We're seeing the effort to make the NATO alliance stronger. We're seeing that NATO weapons deal also being implemented. So we're seeing that effort here to put America first. But when we do that, address these challenges in a way that we have our allies and partners also stay.
Thanks, Tommy. Following up on Caroline's comments at the White House briefing, she said there would be a new aid distribution plan announced in Gaza. Do you have any details? Will GHF be involved in that? Is it exclusively GHF? Will it involve additional openings of crossings, for example? Anything you can tell us there?
Nothing to further add in addition to what the president has said on this. It is clear, though, from Special Envoy Witkoff's trip that this is a priority. We are working on this. We're trying to get as much aid as possible. We've seen the 100 million meals, of course, almost that number, being delivered by GHF. But the president wants to get as much aid as possible into Gaza without it being looted by Hamas.
And then if I could follow up, the administration lifted sanctions on extremist Israeli settlers earlier this year. Is there any consideration of putting those sanctions back on, given there has been no change in behavior by these settlers and they have in fact killed more people in the months since?
So I'm not going to preview what actions we may take here from the United States government. What I can say is that this issue, as Caroline described, was raised by the president to the Israeli government. The ambassadors also talked about the fact that he has raised this issue with the Israeli government. The fact that we need to see these attacks stop and we need to see accountability. Yes.
Thank you. NHK. I'd like to ask about U.S.-Iran negotiation. Iranian Foreign Minister Alaguchi told Financial Times that U.S. must agree on compensation before nuclear negotiation, since U.S. attacked Iran's nuclear sites. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, what I can say is that any demands for financial compensation from the United States to the Iranian regime are ridiculous. If the Iranian regime really wanted to save money or alleviate some of the sanctions policy, they would stop taking destabilizing actions. They would stop wasting money on their nuclear program. They would stop sending money to terrorist death squads across the region. They would stop oppressing their own people. So if they really wanted to save money or find a way towards prosperity for their people, they would start taking those actions. So any demands for financial compensation from the United States are ridiculous. But to stress, the United States is ready to talk with Iran. Iran has a short window of opportunity, but the ball is in Iran's court. So we're waiting to see what they do in terms of now it's in their court. Yes, Nadia.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the PLO office. You just said that the PLO
Last
and the
question
PA,
on the PLO.
Yes, last one, please.
Last one, okay.
You said that the PA and the PLO are not in compliance of Act 1989 and of the Middle East Peace Commitment of 2002. Do you believe that Israel is in compliance of these two agreements? And do you believe that building settlements, enlarging settlements, is not in violation of all previous peace commitment that Israel has signed?
Well, what I can say is speak to this report. That's what I can speak to. And again, speaking to this report, again, the Biden administration found the PLO not in compliance and decided not to take any action. And the PLO remains in non-compliance. This is the first report that we have had under this administration. That's why we're seeing this action taken, this biannual report. And it's important that we're vocal about this. We're outlining the reasoning behind it as we have. And it's an important issue here. We're identifying this noncompliance and choosing to take action.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Tommy. Caroline Levitt addressed this a bit. President Trump posted earlier today that the Canadian recognition of a Palestinian state could affect a trade deal between the two countries. So it goes beyond just disagreement with the countries supporting a Palestinian state. It looks like it's actually turning into action. To what extent does the recognition of a Palestinian state by these several countries over the last few days, how is it going to impact the bilateral relations between the U.S. and those countries?
Well, the president's comments speak for themselves, though he also spoke about how, in terms of these recognition, that it is helping Hamas. The secretary also spoke to this. It could be seen as a reward for Hamas in many ways. We actually saw on the day that Hamas rejected, as the secretary described today, rejected the ceasefire deal was the same day that France announced their recognition. So we are seeing, as the president described, that this could be seen as a reward for Hamas. And in many ways, as the secretary also said, this could hurt the process of peace. Because of these timelines they set there, Hamas has been the one blocking reaching a ceasefire. Hamas has been the one blocking peace. And now we have these timelines set that could actually lead to a reward for Hamas if they continue in this behavior. So that's what we're seeing here. The president and secretary have talked about this. I have nothing further to add to the president's comments in terms of a trade talks with Canada.
Okay, and
Do you have one more?
well, I was going to ask if you also have on Special Envoy Witkoff's travel and whether there's any update on these alternative options for helping hostages that was referenced in his statement last week. Is there an actual plan that is being operationalized? Does it coincide with his travel there now?
Well, I wouldn't speak to sensitive discussions of that nature if there was a plan or if there wasn't a plan in place, given how important these discussions are. What I can say, as Caroline said again, is that he is having meetings there discussing next steps for the situation in Gaza. Amongst the things discussed is the humanitarian situation, getting as much food in as possible.
With regard to the sanctions, could you just clarify on the PLO and PA? Could you just clarify that this is not in retaliation for or related to or an effort to hinder the PA's cooperation with France, Britain, Canada, and the Gulf states who have said that they intend to recognize Palestinian statehood in September? And the second one, when should we expect the biannual compliance report on Israel's compliance? I assume that's the same time schedule as the Palestinian assessment?
Well, I'll say on this one, and I'll refer to my earlier answer in terms of the fact that this is biannual review. This has been therefore in process. The review period ended in January 2025. Yes. Yes.
Sorry, but you didn't answer the first one, or say, so does that mean the Israel one is complete, and the U.S. found no violations?
Well, what I can speak to is this report here. That's what I can speak to. And again, the fact that the Biden administration found compliance, chose not to take any actions, non-compliance, chose not to take actions. We also found non-compliance and chose to take action.
But, and
yes.
on the, it's not in retaliation, these sanctions, they have nothing to do with the
just
statehood.
this question, this is part of a biannual review. Yes.
Are you concerned about the degree of global diplomatic isolation for the US on its entire position relating to the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
I reject that premise that we are isolated. I think we are showing through the fact that we have conversations all the time with our allies and partners, the many agreements that are being signed, the fact that we have many different initiatives that are bearing out here because of President Trump's leadership. We're seeing this across the board in Europe. We're seeing it in the Middle East. We're seeing it in the Asia. We're seeing that in the Indo-Pacific. Again and again, agreements being signed, conversations happening because of the leadership of President Trump. And also the fact, as my colleague Caroline talked about, all of the different peace agreements that President Trump has helped broker since he's been in office. So I reject the concept of any sort of isolation here in terms of the United States. I think it's just the opposite, while of course putting America first.
But can you, is there a single country you can name that publicly supports the GHF?
Well, look, what I can say is that we do, and I can say we're committed to getting as many meals as possible into Gaza without it being looted by Hamas. The president also spoke to the fact that he's looking for new efforts to do just that. He spoke about that when he was in Europe. So what I can say and speak to is our commitment, and what I can say and speak to is the many different conversations, agreements, progress we are making with allies and partners around the world.
And just finally, just to add to that, what is the US's policy for a long-term viable peace between Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, as we've said here before, our focus is on ending the conflict and addressing the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Is there a long term? Is there any policy or plan?
I'm not going to preview right now what that is. What I can say is that our focus is on ending the conflict and making sure the hostages are released and getting as much food into Gaza as possible without it being looted by Hamas.